Right, here we go. Okay, I'll call the, what is it, November 2nd meeting of the Charter Commission to order. We'll start off, we got some new Charter Commission members. So I think what I'll do is we'll just go around and have questions of people just to folks. And I'll give it a start. My name is Steve Peterson. I've been on the Charter Commission for, let's see here. Maybe longer than that.
Longer than that.
Maybe it's longer than that. Also a member of the Port Authority Board, former city council member. I live just kind of straight to the south of where we are today. Jamil, let's go with you next.
Good afternoon or good evening. Jamil Masroujeh, a recent appointee to the Charter Commission. I was appointed earlier this year. And also a new resident of the city of Bloomington. I just celebrated my year anniversary as a resident with my wife this past month.
Jim Goodermont, this is my second term on the commission. And I did 2 terms, maybe 3 terms on the Park and Rec. And just an old time Bloomington resident. So that's my story.
Mark Thorson. I've been on the Charter Commission for several years and lived in Bloomington for 35.
I'm Emily Melby, brand new. This is my first meeting. I was just appointed a couple of months ago, so excited to be here. And I've lived in Bloomington for about 8 years.
I'm Ronald Barnes, recently arrived. I've been a Bloomington resident since 94. Anything else? I'm here.
We're happy about that.
I'm Nicole Kohler. Been in Bloomington for about 8 or 9 years in my first term, so we're about 3 years on the commission.
I'm John Stanley, junior high and high school here back in the 60s and then moved away. Came back in 2009, lived straight west of here, married, retired. And to you.
I'm Rod Axtell. I've been a resident of Bloomington since 1985. I can't believe time has gone by so quick. Been active in various community events. I've had the honor of being on the city council. I've been on Charter Commission, I think for about 10 years, 12 years, something like that. Not sure when I joined. I think it was 2010 or 12. Cynthia?
Cynthia Hunt. I've been a resident for, oh gosh, it pains me to say this, 40 some years. Anyway, I also serve on the Port Authority, former Planning Commission member with Steve and Mark. And I think I do predate both of you, so it goes back.
I don't know, but now we need to add another column, which is.
Yeah, so, well, Tom Spees is still alive. So, remember Tom Spees, so we run together, so.
I'm Kathy Gustafson. This is the second term, first year of the second term, and I have been a resident of Bloomington about 20 years.
I'm Brana Lindell, and that is Brana, not Brianna, just so we have that clear. And I've been a resident of Bloomington since 1987 and raised my children here. Went to Jefferson High School. And I spent my career in municipal government for 40 years for the city of South St. Paul. And this is my second term, I believe, on the Charter Commission. I was just reappointed this year.
I'm Melissa Vanderscheid. I'm the Charter Commission attorney, and I'm also the city attorney. I have been here at the city for about 7.5 years.
My name is Adrian Ung. I am the recording secretary for the Charter Commission, and I've been with the city. I lived in the city when I was born in 1994, but I've worked for the city for about 2.5 years now.
Cool. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to the new members of the commission. You'll see all the excitement that we have going through things. There's occasionally excitement. Most of the time, it's pretty straightforward. We have our moments. With that, I'll call item number 2.1, which is approving the minutes.
Actually, not sure, Peterson, maybe I can call
roll. Go ahead and call the roll. Yep.
Sure thing. Please just let me know if you are here today. Rod Axtell.
Here.
Ronald Barnes.
Here.
Nicole Kohler.
Here.
James Goodermont.
Here.
Kathy Gustafson.
Here.
Cynthia Hunt.
Here.
Ronald Lindell.
Here.
Jamil Masrouja.
Here.
Emily Melby.
Here.
Grant Peterson. Absent. Steve Peterson.
Here.
John Stanley. John J. Taylor. Absent. Mark Thorson.
Here.
Carrie Weatherby. Absent. All right, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, then we will move now on to item number 1, which is approval of the minutes. May 4th, 2023, which was our annual meeting this year. Are there any suggestions for changes to the minutes? Otherwise, a motion to approve them would be in order.
I'd make that motion to approve the minutes.
Second that motion.
Motion seconded, that's be approved. Is there no hands leaping into the air? I will call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up is item number 2.2, discussion of periodic review of the charter.
All right. Chair, as you recall, chair members, as you recall, at our annual meeting, one of the items that was discussed was a periodic review of the charter. This was intended to be a very intentional review of it, both for learning and education, but also too for mindfulness about any edits you might want to make. And at that time, I proposed a timeline to tackle that entire review. And there was discussion and a desire to undertake the review within 4 years. And so we're here tonight to provide a proposal for how to do that, as well as to provide you with the requested initial discussion wherein you would rank and or decide, order the items that you would like to discuss and give us some direction on next steps. In the packet, you'll see that there was a copy of the city charter, as well as the rules of procedure for this body, last updated in 1997. Also, some background materials for you were also included. The law for charter cities from the Minnesota statutes, Minnesota Cities Chapter 4 from the handbook that is all about general information about charter cities in Minnesota, and then a link to our website page on the commission. So as background, we'll be going at a very high level tonight, speaking generically, not generically, but generally about city charter powers, charter city powers, and then talking about our specific city charter. I intend it to be at a very high level. My thinking, and you certainly will decide how you want to proceed, but my thinking is that we would try to complete this discussion by 8 o'clock. And so I have 12 slides tonight, and we'll stop and start and pace as the chair and members want to do that. But I just wanted to give you sort of a sense of the level of detail that I was thinking was helpful to get into tonight. And then certainly please provide me with feedback about specific topics that you may want me to get more information for you for our subsequent discussions. Always wanting to provide you with additional resources. The other thing that I've done in preparation for tonight is reach out to other charter cities for other rules of procedure that they have and start collecting some samples. So if you decide that you want to tackle the rules of procedure at our upcoming meeting, I will have some other samples to look at. I will tell you that varies widely. One of them is 1 page long. So this is really, as you know, the charter in general is really a document that is designed by you all, so and the voters, and so you will give us direction on how you want us to proceed. Chair, do you want to add anything more about your hope and goals for this?
No, I think it's worthwhile to kind of, on a periodic basis, and periodic being a very long time. I hope it never happens again while I'm on there. Periodically make our way through the charter and look at things. And already just kind of reading through it, I was like, oh, there's something I'd like to talk about. There's something I'd like to talk about. One of the things that people need to keep in mind is that if we decide we're going to propose changes, they have to go through one of the processes for changing the charter. So it's not like we can just, all those in favor of changing the charter, we do this because I want to change that. It's not going to work. So when we're thinking about changes that we're making, they have to be so obviously right that I can go off to the city council meeting along with the city attorney and convince all the council members to vote for it. Okay, that's number one, which has happened. If you look in here, that's happened a lot. Or it has to be something that would be so popular and easy to explain to people that the voters would vote for it. Okay, those are really the two choices that we have. And so I think it's fine to put a little bit of time into discussing things where you'd be making a substantive change, but I think we have to have the bar for actually proposing something be fairly high. And we may sort them into the two piles. We may have things that we would like to go to the voters and ask about, and we may have a pile over here that we say, we can likely talk the city council into that, and we'll send those off to the city council and do it. But I want people to keep in mind the constraints that we have on actually making changes, so that we don't spend an hour discussing something and get at the end and say, well, we can't do anything about it anyways, so we're not going to do anything. Okay, so Rob?
Chair, if we were to find something to present to the city council, is that for a change to happen, it has to be unanimous vote?
All 7 members of the council.
It has to be 7-0.
Yeah. So we have to get a night when everybody's there, because it's not everybody who's there, it's everybody. And so maybe, likely just from a process perspective, if we're doing this 3 times a year, we may collect up all of the things that seem like the council would be okay with them and go once a year and go talk to them about that. Just because it requires there's a process that runs around that, and that costs money and time to do. And so unless we see something that's so pressing, we're like, hey, we have to take it to the council right away. And this is 63 years old. So the likelihood of that's going to be pretty low. That's what I would propose that we would do, is probably bundle it up in once a year. Go have a conversation with them.
Chair, the other thing I would add to your comments is that there is an annual review of the charter by city staff as well. So around February of each year, I ask all of the department heads and division heads to read the charter. That's my first request. Read the charter again, because you find something new that you forgot about every time. And then the second thing is, are there things that we need to change? And so since I've been here, almost every year we've had a change, an update, an edit, be it to make things possible like tap rooms, or to address policies that weren't functioning very well. For example, the signature requirements for the city attorney. So there has been, and there will continue to be, ongoing annual review by the city staff as well.
Any other questions? Okay, you want to go ahead?
All right, so tonight there's again these 3 areas, the bullets at the bottom. And so let's start highest level here. So there's 2 different types of cities in Minnesota. There's over 800 cities in Minnesota. I think it's 100 and, oh, I got it right here. Oh, I want to get it right. 107 are home rule charters, and the balance are statutory cities. There are 854 cities in the state. Statutory cities only have the powers that the legislature gave them in state law. Home rule charter cities have the powers that are provided for them by the voters enlisted in their charter. They can exercise typically powers that are in state law as well, so long as they don't conflict with state law powers. Also important to note that city charters don't always give powers. Sometimes they restrict powers. So it's really a voter-controlled, resident-controlled document. And we often use the term constitution to talk about what the charter is. It's at the very highest level. And state law sets forward the process, which the chair described briefly, about how you can amend the charter. It also sets forth how your membership is here. It sets forth the process to do that. It gives a couple of provisions about voting thresholds, which I know you all are familiar with, but it's a pretty short chapter. And every charter is very, very different. There was many decades ago a model charter that was put out. And so a lot of cities started with that when they put together their charter city documents or updated their charters. And so oftentimes the layout is similar if you go from charter to charter, but over time, of course, and the amending process, things have changed. So chapter 5 is almost always initiative, referendum, and recall. So just as one example. All right, next slide. I alluded to this a little bit, and we learned about this with the general law. If you remember, during the ranked choice voting requirements, there was a lot of discussion about, do the general election laws of the state of Minnesota, how do they interact with our ranked choice voting provisions? So I wanted to include this because I thought it was recently relevant for us all. We need to be mindful of state law, but we have our own unique lane. Right, so I thought this would be a helpful list to start with. This comes from the League of Minnesota Cities handbook. It's at a very high level. This is just some things to keep in mind because in my experience, when people start editing documents, think documents like this, there's a tendency to be in sort of a city code mindset. And a city code is very specific. It addresses, things that are measured in feet and inches. This particular document, the city charter, is things that are measured in miles, right? It is much, much higher. It is much more comprehensive. It's significantly shorter than the city code of ordinances. And one of the things that they recommend is simple and brief. If you have been on the Charter Commission for a while, you know that we pick our words very carefully and very intentionally, and we don't say stuff that we don't need to say. The other thing to keep in mind is that it should really just deal with topics at the highest level. It doesn't need to create additional government red tape on additional process that isn't necessarily going to create a community-wide benefit and stand in the way of other city code provisions and make things more complicated than they need to be. The other recommendation that the League of Minnesota Cities has is that there be a chief administrative officer, and we use that form of government here in the city of Bloomington. And then they also recommend only one elected body and that advisory boards report directly to the city council. So for those people that aren't as familiar with the League of Minnesota Cities, I should just briefly mention that the League is an entity that's been around for a very, very long time. They're located right across the street from the Capitol. They provide services to all the branches of local government. They provide educational opportunities, and then we also get our insurance coverage through a branch of the League called the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust. So in case anybody's wondering, they have a tremendous number of resources on their website written in a very understandable way. So if you're ever wondering about like what is city licensing, there's a whole chapter about city licensing, city regulation. So there's lots of great stuff out there written in a very easy to digest way that can be understood by people that have never done anything with cities.
Melissa?
Mm-hmm.
So one, you might think, well, when it says only one elected body, you'd be like, what is there in Minnesota that has more than one elected body? And yet, if you go look, Minneapolis is an example where there's more than one. There's three.
There's park board.
Parks and Rec.
There's the park board, there's the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and then there's the city council. They used to have the library board too. But I think the league's opposition to multiple administrative bodies is partially in reaction to cities like Minneapolis where it hasn't been concentrated. And you've seen pressure in Minneapolis to try to make the mayor be a little bit more the chief executive officer of the city. And I think in reaction to that is that people felt that governing structure there was very diffuse. So I think that's why the league is saying that. So,
Chair Peterson?
Yeah.
Quick question. Is there any kind of relationship between being a charter city and being a strong city manager form of government versus strong mayor? Or would you find that both types of governments can be charter cities? I'm just curious if there's any relationship.
You know, I haven't looked at that specific issue. I would say most of the charter cities that I've worked with have had a city manager form of government. But I could do some research on that that I believe is in chapter 1 or chapter 2 of our charter. I could have a more specific answer to you on that. I don't know that.
I was just curious if
Yeah.
if there are any strong mayor forms of government that have a charter,
the league handout actually kind of talks about that. There's 4 cities with strong mayor.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
There's 74 weak mayor ones, and then the remainder are council mayor.
Thank you.
According to the handout.
According
It's on
to,
page 4.
yeah, of chapter 4. Yep.
Yeah.
I knew it was in this, but I wasn't remembering the numbers. So thank you. Right. The league also talks about common subjects that are included in city charters. So I've included a list here just to give you a sense of sort of the breadth of the topics. We have many of these in ours. And then here's ours. We have 12 chapters. It was included in your packet. And it varies in thinking about sort of what kind of information might you need to organize your thoughts on how to have a subsequent discussion about all of the various parts of the charter. I do propose in a subsequent slide how to kind of chop it up. There are some sections that go together a little bit cleaner than others. They just relate to more similar topics. For example, I grouped together, I believe, 1, 2, and 3. And I think that those go together cleanly. And I also try to keep an eye on sort of the length of them. Some of them are quite a bit different, quite a bit longer than others. So chapter 1 is real high level. It contains a clause that I would recommend we definitely keep in, which is the all powers clause. Goes again to that comprehensive grant of authority. Chapter 2 talks about the form of government that we have here, and it talks about this council manager form of government. It also lays out our boards and commissions and how they're established. It also specifically speaks to our merit board. We have a unique entity here at the city, unique among other cities. There aren't too many other cities that have it. A lot of other cities have a civilian service board. We have a merit board system here. Three commissioners on that. It then goes on to talk about elective officers, the mayor and the council, and then our 4 separate districts. We have at-large and we have district representation, terms of office, redistricting, and then incompatible offices, which means can you serve on more than one body at the same time? Vacancies, it talks about the role of the mayor, and that role varies. And the example for Minneapolis is a good one. The powers of the mayor are specifically laid out here, both in chapter 2 and then also in subsequent chapters. And we used that, we had to read those powers very carefully, especially during COVID. We declared a couple of emergencies, and we needed to make sure we were following the charter and state law. It talks about salaries and a clause that we then 2 sections in chapter 2 that we look at about what is the appropriate level of involvement of the city council in the affairs of the city. In the particular form of government that we have here in Bloomington, the city manager is the chief operating officer of the organization. And that position's powers are listed and described very specifically. They are broad. And in other forms of government, it's different. The council has more powers. So sometimes you'll hear the city manager or the CFO or me say that the council is getting too far down into the weeds on something. And that their appropriate level is policy. And so that is coming from the charter. All right, then chapter 3 is talking about procedures, all kinds of things on procedures, how to pass ordinances, how to pass rules, how many, your quorum requirements, the emergency ordinances, their first meeting of the year, how you have to sign, when things take effect. We actually amended that one a couple of years ago because it used to be that it took effect only on a certain date, and that didn't work for our taproom stuff. And so we tackled that. How to repeal things, codify things, all kinds of, it does get a little bit specific here. It uses the term loose leaf paper. It also uses the term, it talks specifically about how we have to amend the ordinance, underscore. You can also use italics under some circumstances. So, it does get pretty specific on things. The other thing that you'll find in the charter is it often talks about vote counts. We have 7-member council, and that is a relatively unique number in Minnesota. Many of them are 5. And so when you're calculating vote counts for supermajority or 2/3 and all the rest, our numbers are different. So we actually have many in the drawers next to me where I sit at the council. There is many pages that list all of our voting requirements because they vary widely based on what we're talking about. All right, chapter 4 talks all about our elections. We had some experience with this when we did the ranked choice voting work. There's specific discussion about ranked choice voting in this chapter of our charter. And then chapter 5, which I mentioned at the very beginning, this is initiative, referendum, and recall. We talked about this in our ranked choice voting and in our organized collection litigation. This was discussed in great detail in those 2 3 lawsuits. And not all cities have these provisions. We have all 3 of them. Some cities have 2, some cities have 1 of them, some cities have none of them. So we have all 3, and we have tweaked this section several times over the years to try and make it easier for people to understand and to provide more samples so that people have a little bit more of a roadmap if they want to try and use the procedures in chapter 5. The other thing that I'll mention that comes up with some frequency, I'm just putting it out there because it might be something you want to consider, is this petition concept that's in this chapter. And the term petition is used all the time, very generally. People, we have a petition, they'll say, at the podium, or, they'll send us some, pages and pages of a petition to do X, Y, or Z. And that term means something in chapter 5. And so we have an internal process that we use to figure out whether somebody is trying to follow the process in chapter 5, or if they're not. And sometimes that includes me asking them, are you intending to follow the provisions in chapter 5? Because if they did, and I didn't appreciate that when they submitted their documents and I didn't check, the result of that can sometimes be that it's approved if I don't affirmatively respond back to them. So it's something that we pay really close attention to. All right, chapter 6. That is, it gets into greater detail about the powers of the city manager. Again, that merit system that I mentioned, subordinate officers within the city. Our charter only creates the office of city clerk. We have a brief, many years ago, a lot of cities had to create this emergency management director, I believe was the title. And so a lot of cities have that in their fire code sections. We have the office of city clerk. We have the mayor, we have the city council members. There's a reference to the city attorney in the charter, but we don't have other department heads listed in our charter to at great detail. It just says, going to again to this sort of brevity approach, the council can create departments, divisions, and bureaus for the administration of city affairs as it deems necessary. So that just gives you sort of a sense of the decisions that have been made over the years. You don't have in here in the charter the creation of the community development department, for example. All right, and then chapter 7 goes on and talks about taxation and finance. This is where you have your Board of Appeal and Equalization, fiscal years, the requirement that we have an annual budget prepared, how you have to pass that budget, enforce that budget, alterations to the budget. You'll see that we bring resolutions to the city council when there is a budget adjustment, and that is coming out of the charter, for example. There is some language in here about debt, establishing permanent improvement revolving funds. There's also something that was created that we recently started using more often, the general obligation charter bonds. You might remember we did a lot of work on that back in 2017. There were some tweaks that were done to it then, and we all learned a lot about it at that point. We've used it, I believe, to finance park improvements a couple of times. Chapter 8 talks about levying for improvements and assessments. Chapter 9 gets into the often discussed, although not nearly as often anymore, topic of eminent domain. And chapter 10 is franchises, which in the world of government means the stuff that's buried underneath the ground in the right of way, not McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. And then chapter 11 talks about utilities, the operation of utilities. In Bloomington, we do not have an electrical utility. We have a water utility, and we do not. So it says that it gives us the authority to operate gas, water, heat, power, light, telephone, and other public utilities. We do not do all of those things. We do have a water utility. Some cities have more utilities than we do. Going on to chapter 12. This is the miscellaneous chapter. All kinds of things are in here. Oaths, something about how you deal with contracts when city officials are involved with them. Sales of real property, vacation. We have a different vacation of streets, which doesn't mean they're having like on the beach. Vacation means that we had plotted them as a public street, which means that certain things certain requirements come on because of that. For example, plowing them. And there is a process, a very specific process that has to be followed in order to make them no longer be public streets. So we have a process that is a little bit different than what is in state law. We also have the process of how we can sell real property, very specific process there as well. And then you'll also see at the very end of this, you'll see the voter approved solid waste collection process. That is the result of the organized collection litigation that we had. And this is where we placed it in the charter. So that again is a very high level. The subsequent pages talk about all the amendments that have been happening over all these years and what they were generally speaking. With regard to the process of amending, we have done various processes to amend the charter in my time here at the city. You know, there's obviously the unanimous vote of the city council. That is the quickest. definitely the quickest. There's also one that is more like a tennis match where it goes back and forth between the two bodies. We have done that. The process is a little bit different if it starts at the Charter Commission or if it starts at the City Council. It can start in either place. And then there's also the option of the vote, voting on the items by all the members of the public. The other thing to note is that there are requirements for publication of a lot of the changes of the charter. So there are very specific publication requirements in the newspaper and in another, we put it on our website and other places. The timing of those is quite a bit longer than for a city code ordinance amendment. We've talked about that in the past. That's likely an appropriate thing to do, given that this is more like the constitution of the city. And we work hard to get the information out there and accessible beyond just having it in the newspaper. All right. With that, we thought it'd be a good time to have some discussion and to perhaps rank these. And I'm gonna, because you all have the charter in front of you, and because I listed them here, I'll just indicate to you that I do have a proposed plan, but you can certainly tweak it.
Commissioner Extel.
I have a question here, and this is a history question. This goes back to all the amendments that were made in 1970 or 71 related to clubs. Does anyone remember what that actually caused that? What was the
Or bona fide.
the political reasons behind that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly find it out because all of this is saved. And we can get that for you. I know that over the years, and we learned this when we were doing the research on the tap rooms, that Bloomington had has a very long history with regard to alcohol in the city of Bloomington and the sale of alcohol. The line, as I recall, it explained to me, and I'm hoping that I'm getting this still accurate, Edina was wet and Bloomington was not for a while. And so there was specific things in our documents that related to that. The other thing that we learned is that Bloomington for a long time did not have bars. They had restaurants that served alcohol. So the term club has long meant something very specific in the state liquor licensing. So I can certainly go and research that if you'd like to learn more. My guess is it had something to do with that.
Yeah, this is just really, a curious Bloomington.
Yeah, we learned so much interesting stuff when we were working on it.
My first thought it was maybe related to when they constructed the decathlon club. I think that's probably about the time that club was built.
Could be that. But also, it's like VFW or American Legion.
Yeah.
The fraternal organizations.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you think that the city of Salt Lake City is only alcohol is in clubs, not in restaurants, only in clubs. So.
Any other questions? Back to the schedule. Slide. So this is the kind of phasing that the attorney is proposing, I think. I think from a sequencing perspective, it's only like combining 7, 8, and 12, which would be taxes, public improvements and assessments, and the dumping ground of miscellaneous. Just looking at it, does anybody object to this, or does this make sense?
Looks reasonable.
I did add the rules of procedure.
Yeah.
The city council spent 2 years on its rules of procedure. I think it was. Yours are shorter, but they also haven't been looked at in a very long time. And there is some spots that are a little bit clunky for us to use in 2023. And we just use it and we try to comply with it as best as we can in 2023. But I would like to look at it, but I would look to you for guidance on what level of detail you want us to get at. I would say the one thing I think that needs to be updating is the minutes section. And it requires this process back and forth. And given that we have a tradition of meeting once a year, it just is a really long time since any of us have sort of been together for us to be looking at the document again. And so that is a little bit out of step with how we work. So, and then also too, the one thing that's always kind of been awkward for me in doing this work is the order of business that we have. And I remember Commissioner Thorson, when you were the chair, there was some odd kind of cadence of like you had become the chair. And I think there was no other chair there or something. And we're like, well, you can't really be the chair yet because you're not elected until number 9. And it was just kind of clunky. Yeah. And then we also are required under state law to submit an annual report to the chief judge. And so we have a tradition of creating sort of this mocked up report.
Because we're typically meeting once a year.
Right. And that just kind of, it just doesn't always work very well. Yeah. And so some things that are sort of functionally a little bit clunky for us. I can certainly propose specific changes if you'd like, but those are the two areas that have been just a little bit kind of clunky to deal with in this setting.
Mr. Chairman, and I guess I'll address this question to the charter members that are relatively new. Is there one area here that you think you'd benefit more from perhaps changing the rotation here? For example, if you're really into taxes, should that be up first? Or again, I don't know how much education we're going to drill down, but the process is important. And you always hear the chatter about, taxes ends up being a political ball all the time. So the more information we have, I think the better informed we are. So I just address that question to anyone that's been around just for a couple of years. Or does it make a difference?
Okay, I'll just say that I like what's been presented. It looks like a good, healthy order and as efficiently and effectively as we can get to all the content. So I'm just in support of it.
Okay. Any other comments? One thing I saw, and I think Andrew was suspicious about the rules of procedure because I asked him for some copies of some other ones just to kind of compare. But in reading the rules of procedure, it seemed to me that there were some things we could just cut out of it, that it doesn't have to be as specific as it is. And so one of the things, if we decide to take this in this order, that I'd encourage you to look at is decide what really needs to be in the rules. Like, does the order of the agenda really need to be in the rules at all? Or can we just conventionally create an agenda and adopt it at the beginning of the meeting and that's it? Things like that. So
approve the agenda at the meeting. That seems to be the way it's done in most places anymore. But
yeah. Anything else?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'm guessing that if we've covered chapters 1, 2, and 3, and something when we're discussing 7, 8, 9 comes up that kind of relates back in some way, that nothing will prevent us from revisiting some of our thoughts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 2 years later.
Any other comments? Otherwise, go
I just
ahead.
have a question.
Yeah.
What is the process for any amendments or changes to the rules of procedure? Do we have authority to just decide that as a group, or what does that process look like?
Chair and members, I believe that you all just need to approve it as a group.
Does that have to be unanimous then?
This would be a simple majority then.
I would say, yeah, probably just some simple majority. One thing that is a little bit different is that the city council created commissions, when they change their rules of procedure, they have to have them approved by the city council. We do not, because we are, I don't think we do anyway. I will double check that. It might be actually buried in another document, because I'm thinking of another city that is required. So let me double check that. But as you recall, the Charter Commission and the Port Authority and the HRA and the Planning Commission are created in state law, and their obligations and their rules are a little bit different than the city council created commissions like placemaking and park and rec. So just a little bit of a difference there.
Any other comments? Otherwise, a motion to adopt the schedule would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Been seconded. Any discussion?
Sorry, who seconded that one?
Commissioner Gustafson. Commissioner Hunt, okay. Not hearing any discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
All right, Chair, the other thing that we look for is some direction on frequency. There was some discussion about meeting 3 or 4 times a year. That would, if we met 3 times a year, that would relatively be captured with 1 chapter at a time. But certainly looking for direction on that so that Adrian can start setting meetings.
I'll toss out a suggestion that we meet once in the first quarter of the year. We have the annual meeting. We don't meet in the summertime, and we meet twice in the fall. What do people think about that? And I just made that up off the top of my head. Don't.
So you're saying 4?
We'd set it at 4 because we have the annual meeting
Right.
plus 3 meetings to kind of do that. And if we got this work done, we could get rid of the last meeting. We don't have to have it.
That worked for you, good.
So we're talking January and then September, November or something?
It'd be January, there would be the May annual meeting,
Okay.
then like September, November.
I was thinking March probably isn't a good time for certain people.
January would be great.
Mr. Chair, I would just comment that I worry that we'd lose some inertia, even at, 1 meeting every 3 months, you're kind of revisiting, kind of reacquainting yourself. That's my only concern about a January, September kind of approach.
Another option would be to say we would do September, October, November. Just do it that way and just be boom, boom, boom. That way we have some kind of a little bit more of a meeting frequency. Could even be more frequent than that. We could say every 2 or 3 weeks for 3 meetings in a row. Do it in the fall.
Chair members, I'll note that your rules of procedure require that the packets go out 10 days in advance. And so if we meet every month, you'll be getting, we'll be working on, because of the requirements of the minutes, we'll be working on minutes from the previous meeting at the same time as we will be working on a packet for the next one, which is fine, but I'm just noting that there will be a lot of communications between you and I in September, October, November.
Cool.
How long are we kind of thinking that like each one would be, each chapter?
Chair and members, chapter 1 is very short, has 3 sections. So I was thinking of coupling the rules of procedure with chapter 1. For example, I kind of like the idea of tackling them in the September, October, November approach for the momentum reason, with the goal of maybe not needing the November meeting. November is kind of tricky to schedule meetings because you've got holidays in there.
Mr. Chair, I might be alone here, but I would also be supportive of meeting through the summer if it's once a month or every other month. I mean, most commissions, city council, they're meeting throughout the year. And again, for the same purpose, if we're going to tackle the charter, let's tackle it. And let's do it in a way that we're not losing momentum as you know, that's just my own personal thought.
How about every quarter? I mean, the first quarter of the year, or second quarter on the first Thursday of the month, just to keep it in sequence, I guess, simpler. Just a thought.
So I'll ask the group just to kind of hone in on something. Can I get a show of hands from a set of people who think that trying to maintain a sequence of like 3 meetings consecutively in a relatively short period of time is desirable in terms of getting things done, or whether they prefer to be spread out? And so if you prefer having kind of in a sequence, like in the September, October, November, or a summertime sort of thing, I would ask you to raise your hand at this point.
So this is September, October, November?
This would be just having them in sequence, and then we'll talk about where the position of the sequence is going to be in a second, but just to try to have it be compact. Then I'll ask if you're looking for it to be more spread out over the year, if you'd raise your hand and kind of give us your vibe on that. I saw more hands for doing it boom, 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 as opposed to kind of spreading it out over the year. So then I guess the question is kind of when. And I'm going to just kind of propose this. I'll say, unless there isn't a lot of, if I'm going to offer you 3 options. One option is going to be we do 3 meetings before the annual meeting in May, the beginning of May. There is a second option where we do it all in the summertime. There's a third option where we do it in the fall before December. Okay. So what I want you to do is raise your hand for one of these. So first I'll ask people who would like to do it prior to the May meeting and have 3 meetings in that time.
Chair, can I,
Go ahead.
Can I offer one comment? The meeting in May is a regular meeting, and the other ones would be special meetings. And you cannot add new items other than what you've published on a special meeting. On a regular meeting in May, you could. The reason I think this is particularly relevant is if you decide that in your work in the first quarter of this, that you want to put things on that May agenda and they're still sort of developing, we would have greater flexibility if you front loaded it in the first part of the year. The other point that I think is relevant is that there is a fair amount of what's the word for it? Setting up of these items if they're going to turn into council charter amendments. And having that meeting in May after your direction to me would be helpful, as opposed to doing it September, October, November, and then we have to wait 5 months until we have an annual meeting. So we might end up having to have a meeting in January, you tee up a bunch of items, and then instead of you not wanting to wait until May to do them.
Okay, with that, we'll just kind of take a poll on this. So again, the question, the 3 options are going to be kind of in the winter, spring prior to May. There's going to be during the summer, and there's going to be in the fall prior to December. Okay, so if you support the first one, raise your hand. Okay.
In the spring prior to the meeting.
In the spring prior to the meeting, raise your hand. Okay.
First 4 months.
Yeah, I'd see a lot of support for that.
It makes sense.
You got nothing to do, do you?
So now that brings to bear a question that I'm going to ask you now. This is like a question. This is a Steve question, because I'm gone a lot in the first quarter. So if you're going to pick that, and I'm okay with you picking it, we probably need to have a conversation about somebody else chairing those meetings, because or being very tricky about the timing. So.
Usually I'm around your situation.
Yeah.
Let me just say, my preference is to have you around to conduct business of the meeting. Just Because you do a good job and it provides the continuity that we need generally.
Okay, well then maybe we'll have a conversation and try and build a schedule that. Okay.
Schedule them at your convenience. It
Yeah.
doesn't make.
I'm
a
not,
difference.
I'm not gone for super long periods of time. I just am gone a lot. And so it just, if you want me to lead it, we don't have unlimited flexibility on that. Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, and again, this is coming from my business, is that a January, February for me is much better than March, April.
The April 14th meeting, we're not gonna get.
Yeah, it's,
Oh, but
Rod
there's
is
a
in-
March, there's a March.
Rod's in the
deadline there
tax.
too.
Yeah.
There's a March deadline. Yeah. Okay, so it seems like what we're gonna try and do is we're gonna schedule this for the kind of basically the first quarter of next year. And we'll, kind of, if anybody else has anything schedule constraints, what I would suggest that you do is that you email me and Melissa, and then we'll try to take that and boil it down into something. And so if you've got your Caribbean vacation that you're thinking about, that'd be like Mr. Stanley probably. No. Just let us know and we'll try to set up a schedule that works for everybody.
propose some dates that
Yeah.
for all of us, and we can
Fine.
respond to that.
That makes
Maybe
sense?
it's just 2 meetings in January and February.
Might be, yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay. What else did you need from us tonight?
That is helpful direction. We need to adjourn.
So I think just as a kind of thinking problem for folks, just go back to that real quick. It was, at least for me, like reading those sections of the charter and then just think about it a little bit. So that when the packet comes, that you've already read it once. And then in the rules of procedure, the copy I have, there were I wrote down next to a couple things, and the one that I had, that this is something that could be gotten rid of or didn't make sense in there. And so, go and mark that up. And that's something that we can kind of deal with as a group pretty easily. So with that, is there any other?
Bit of calculating on terms. We have 4 people whose terms expire in 2024. And all in February and March. So if you're, start thinking ahead, if you're thinking about staying on or not staying on, and you could let Adrian know that. If you don't know when your term ends and you want to know, it's on here. And so that's going to be a tricky time to be down 4 members. So just something to be mindful of. It does take, there is a very specific amount of time in state law that we have to turn it around. And so the sooner we can have a heads up on that, the better, just the better everything is for everybody. Plus we have a new chief judge.
Yes,
So it'll all be a little bit different perhaps.
Are you gonna get out of this?
Okay, anything else for the committee tonight? With that, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. Okay, been moved and seconded. And all those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Adjourned.
That's 7:58. Recording?
We did take.
Where'd you go?
Yeah.
16 down.
Yeah.
Took one day in the office.